This check is worthless. I won't let you cash it.
Tear the paper if you want, but you can't tear down the truth.
This doesn't look real. People like you try this all the time.
I earned this money. You don't get to decide my worth.
If you don't leave now, we'll call the police.
Go ahead, call them. I have nothing to hide.
The bank on Michigan Avenue wore its late afternoon habits like a well-pressed suit. Glass doors whispered open and shut as people drifted in from the cool of early spring, their jackets speckled with the faint dust of the city. Overhead, soft music threaded through the lobby, just loud enough to veil small talk and the rustle of paper envelopes. At the teller line, a printed placard reminded customers that closing would come soon, and that deposits after that hour would be credited the next business day. Clerks stacked trays, locked drawers halfway, and swapped glances that said the day was almost done. Angela Coleman joined the end of the line with the unhurried poise of someone accustomed to schedules and boardrooms. She carried a slim leather folder, its edges clean, its clasp polished. A security guard by the entrance greeted her with the careful courtesy of a long day, and she returned it with a quiet good afternoon that fit the hush of the room. Behind her, a woman in a navy coat sighed about traffic near the river and asked whether the tulip beds on the boulevard had opened yet. Angela smiled, said she hoped the flowers would be out by the weekend, then turned her attention to the counters, measuring the distance to the front by the rhythm of the line. From her place, she could see the way sunlight fanned across the marble, the way it caught the gold trim of a branch, advertisement promising dignity and respect for every customer. The words floated above a photograph of a teenage boy with a confident smile. No one in the lobby paid the sign much mind. Habit has a way of making promises invisible. The line shortened. At one station, a teller counted singles out loud for a college kid with a pizza box tucked under his arm. At another, a woman asked about a cashier's check for a security deposit. Near the far end, a teller with a sharp part in his hair and a nameplate that read, Kyle tapped his keyboard with fast, staccato keystrokes. He glanced up between transactions with an alertness that felt less like attentiveness and more like a quiz show buzzer waiting for the right moment to sound. Angela's folder was light in her hand, so light that it seemed it might drift upward if she loosened her grip. Inside lay a single piece of paper, stout and pale, its security fibers woven like fine threads. She had looked at it earlier that day at her kitchen counter, coffee steaming nearby, and had thought how ordinary a thing could be even when it represented months of sleepless work. The amount written on the line was not a new car or a beach house or a luxury cruise. It was recognition. It was a bookmark. It was a period at the end of a long sentence. When her turn came, she stepped forward and set the folder on the counter with the same care she would use to place a glass on a polished dining table. Kyle glanced at her shoes, at her blazer, at the folder. His eyes flicked to the small camera dome near the ceiling and then back to her face. He did not smile. Deposit, please, Angela said, her voice even. She unlatched the folder and drew out the check, sliding it over so that the printed amount and the signature line faced him. Into my personal account. Kyle picked up the check with 2 fingers as if its corners might smear. He tilted it toward the light and made a small, skeptical sound that was not quite a word. That is quite a number, he said, lifting one eyebrow. What is this for? A settlement payment. Angela replied. She kept her tone level, conversational, from a corporate transaction. Uh-huh. He held the paper up higher, as though distance would reveal a hidden watermark or an invisible confession. He tapped a code into the terminal, then another, then sighed theatrically. Do you have additional identification? Yes. She slid over her driver's license and the metal card embossed with her name. Both are current. He studied the license, then the card, then the check again. Around them, the bank's mood began to tilt. A man with a messenger bag stopped pretending to read his phone and openly watched. A child in a puffer jacket tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked how much longer. The security guard at the door shifted his stance by a quarter turn, as if moving to catch a better angle for an expected photograph. Angela folded her hands on the counter, the way she might at a conference table when she knew a colleague was about to say something unhelpful. Patience, she reminded herself. The artist's brush is still above the canvas. Kyle cleared his throat and set the check flat on the counter, smoothing it with his palm. What company did you say? He asked, though she had not yet been given a chance to say it. She answered calmly. He typed it in, peered at the screen, and let out a soft whistle that did not sound impressed. He glanced to the side. I may need my manager for this. His voice carried, and the manager heard it. A woman in a fitted jacket approached with steps that clicked like small metronomes, each one measured, each one meant to be heard. Her nameplate read Susan. She gave Angela a dry professional smile and nodded at Kyle as if there were 2 people entering an elevator together. What do we have? Susan asked. Large check, Kyle said. Odd timing. He did not need to add minutes before closing. when patience thins and the staff would rather balance drawers than solve puzzles. He turned the check towards Susan and tapped at the signature line. Settlement. From a company I do not recognize. Angela supplied the name again, and Susan's smile did a complicated thing, the kind of expression that says, I know important things, and also I find your claim inconvenient. Additional identification? Susan asked as if the request were new. Angela provided everything asked. Susan angled each document toward the light and squinted, as if hunting for mischief between the letters of Angela's name. The moment stretched. The lobby settled further into silence. From the line, a woman in a navy coat murmured to the man behind her, and he answered with the familiar refrain of a long week. Some people choose the worst time. Near the entrance, the security guard exchanged a look with a second guard coming on duty. That quiet, wordless question of whether anything was about to become an incident. A stroller squeaked. The room smelled faintly of copier toner and hand sanitizer. Who issued this? Susan asked. Angela repeated the issuer, steady as a metronome. And you are depositing the full amount? I am. Kyle typed again, the keys snapping. He turned the paper over, studying the back as if it might confess under interrogation. He ran a thumb across the microprint line, then held the check between his hands like a playing card he might flick into a hat. You know, he said, his tone shifting from neutral to something performative, we see a lot of people try things like this near the end of the day. Angela kept her gaze on the countertop, on its faint scratches that formed a geography of hundreds of small transactions. She took a breath and let it out slowly. The breath did not shake. I am just doing my job, Kyle added, to no one in particular, and to everyone, which is a very particular way of speaking. He lifted the check higher, elbow straight, and looked past Angela to the line, to the room, to the ceiling where the camera lens would be. In the periphery, someone pulled out a phone. The movement made a whisper of sound in the quiet, like a page turning. The person did not raise the phone high. The lens hugged the side of her jacket, discreet, attentive. The glow of the screen kissed her cheek. A small boy in a red cap pointed at the promotional poster with the smiling teenager and asked his mother if that boy went to his school. The mother shushed him and squeezed his shoulder, her eyes lingering on the counter where Angela stood. She had daughters at home, she would later think. And a person can tell when a line has been crossed, even if no one has said it yet. A teller 2 stations down closed a cash drawer and began counting overnight deposits. Another asked if anyone needed quarters. The bank's machinery ticked toward its nightly rest. Receipts fed into drawers, printers cooling, keyboards quieting, and yet this line did not move. It waited where it was, fixed on a single exchange. Angela's voice, when she spoke again, was gentle enough to belong to a librarian. Is there a problem with the deposit? Kyle's smile showed too many teeth. He raised the check another inch, wrist cocked like a man about to deliver a magic trick. The room gathered around the angle of his hand, the paper's edge, the breath before the flourish. Lady, this check looks fake. You think you can fool us? The sentence landed in the lobby with a dull, public weight. The man with the messenger bag flinched. The woman in the navy coat pressed her lips together. Somewhere near the door, the second guard stopped mid-step. Susan inclined her head as if the line had been inevitable and helpful. Angela did not look away. Her hands remained folded, palms resting on the counter, fingers aligned. She had the expression of someone evaluating a spreadsheet that will not balance because a single cell has been formatted as text. There was no fear in her face, no surrender, only a patience so composed it could be mistaken for stillness. Kyle's arm moved. The paper bent. The sound that followed was delicate and unmistakable. A fabric torn along a seam with the care of a person unwrapping a gift. A sound that turned stranger for how clearly it carried in the room meant for coin and whisper. He tore a corner from the check. The rip rang out like the opening note of a tragedy. The torn corner hovered between Kyle's fingers like a feather that refused to fall. Conversations in the bank stalled and then thinned to a hush that carried the faint scent of paper and hand sanitizer. From the far office, the steady click of the manager's heels marked her approach the way a metronome marks a score. Angela Coleman did not move. From the angle of the counter, her calm resembled a quiet harbor, but in her eyes, a small, steady light suggested she was measuring the tide rather than fearing it. The wall clock over the lobby door showed 2:50 in the afternoon, and that detail, though mundane, made people impatient. A mother shushed the toddler with the promise of a snack after they finished here. A young man in a windbreaker rolled his shoulder to settle a backpack strap. A thin man with a messenger bag sighed and muttered something about the last train. Outside, a delivery truck exhaled and a bus hissed at the curb, the ordinary breath of the city threading under the bank's controlled air. Susan Miller reached the counter and gave the practiced smile of a person who could recite policy as if it were prayer. Identification, she said, not unkindly, but not softly either. Her gaze skimmed Angela's blazer, the tasteful wristwatch, the folder's clean edges. Additional identification, she added, as though anticipating what had already been offered. Angela produced her driver's license, a corporate identification card in brushed metal, and a proof of address. She laid them out in a neat row, like utensils at a well-set table. Her voice was even. These are current. Susan lifted each item and turned it toward the light with almost theatrical care. The metal card flashed and steadied. The license showed Angela's photo in the honest lighting that licensing offices favor. Susan made the small sound of someone puzzling through a crossword clue and not liking the letters she found. At the doorway, the security guard, Frank Doyle, adjusted his stance by a discreet inch and a half, a movement intended to mean, I am paying attention, and if I must, I will do more. He did not touch his radio. He did not speak. Yet his presence pressed against the scene the way a thumb presses a wrinkle from linen. The teller line had slowed because Kyle was not counting bills or handing out receipts. He was performing. He leaned as if to let the surveillance camera catch an angle, then looked past Angela to the people behind her, inviting them to witness diligence. We do see this, he announced to the generator. End of day, big amounts, no patience for verification. He glanced at Susan, his eyebrows asking for approval. In the line, a young boy in a knit cap stared at Angela with frank curiosity. His mother, Jessica Clark, curled an arm around him and his sister and told them softly that they would be home soon. The boy's gaze shifted to the poster above the chairs near the exit, where a teenage face smiled under a promise that every customer would be treated with dignity and respect. He read the words silently, lips shaping the promise as if testing how it would sound. A few spots back, Maria Lopez angled her phone slightly, almost absent-mindedly, as if checking the time. The screen's glow painted the inside of her sleeve. She glanced from the counter to the feed and back without lifting the phone higher, without calling attention. She brushed the thumb across the glass and began to stream to a small circle of friends, the way one might wave a neighbor over to the fence when something unusual is happening on the street. On the screen, comments seeded quickly. A handful of names, a few exclamation points, one word watching. Edward Harris, gray-haired and careful with his posture, set his cane against his knee and leaned toward the man behind him. He chose a phrase as old as the city's sidewalks, a phrase that could mean everything and nothing at once. Some people, he said, and let the two words bloom with implication. Susan straightened the identification cards into a perfect line and looked at Angela. We'll need 3 forms of identification, she said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and as if 3 were the exact number that would soothe an undefined concern. And a proof of address dated within the last 30 days. She was reciting now, but her eyes were measuring too. You have them, Angela answered. They're in front of you. Her tone did not sharpen. It did not bend. It simply existed, steady, and finished, like a sentence that does not require a question mark. Kyle tapped his keyboard with staccato rhythm. The sound skittered through the lobby. He held the check so that the printed amount faced him, then turned it so that the signature faced the ceiling, then turned it back again. We are trained to look for patterns, he said, a teacher explaining chalk on a board. Angles, fonts, spacing. People who try to get one over on us usually do not pay attention to those tells. He glanced at the torn corner, then lifted it closer to his face as if it might confess a secret if he were near enough. Maria's comments ticked upward by single digits at first friends from the neighborhood, a cousin on lunch break on the other side of town, an aunt in the suburbs who played the feed out loud while washing dishes. Someone typed, "That looks like Michigan Avenue." And someone else answered, "Yes, near the big department store, I think." The feed sound was low, the image a little shaky, but the story was shoulders and faces and posture and tone, and those, even in a small window, readers know by heart. Frank's shadow fell across the floor, sliding toward Angela's shoes. He was close enough now that she could see the stitching on his leather belt, the fine crack that appears when a loop is used every day in the same hole. "Ma'am," he said, and the word tried to perform both respect and directive. "Please stand where you are." He gestured to a square of tile that was, if anything, exactly where she was already standing. A soft chime sounded from a teller station across the room as the terminal signaled a balanced drawer. The teller slipped the band around a stack of bills and tucked the roll into a compartment with the efficiency of habit. Then, even that small rhythm gave way to stillness. The bank was listening to its own heartbeat. Susan moved the identification back toward Angela. "These look sophisticated," she said to Kyle, "but meant for the room to hear. Sophisticated is often what we see." She spoke in a register that made generalizations feel like policy, and policy feel like morality. Angela did not correct her. She considered the path of least harm, silence now, clarity later. She took the cards and placed them back in her folder in the same order she had presented them. She looked up and saw Maria's eyes meet hers for a sliver of a second acknowledgement, nothing more. And then Maria looked down again to her phone as if answering a text. Kyle curled the check in his hand. The torn corner bent backward and forward at the score like a hinge. His expression brightened with the thrill of the connoisseur certain he had found a forgery. "Spacing's off," he said. "Watermark is too perfect. Real ones show the tiniest drift, like a signature that is alive rather than printed." He smiled with the air of a magician about to reveal the trapdoor in the floor. This is why they try near closing. They hope we rush. May I speak with corporate security? Angela asked, and it sounded less like a request than like an avenue she would eventually walk whether they open the gate or not. We will get there, Susan replied, calm but edged. After we complete the preliminary check. Wei yu lao lei no I wei si. Behind them, the line reassembled itself into pairs and small clusters that, without discussion, took size. A man in a navy cap pursed his lips. A woman in a floral scarf shifted to see around Jessica's stroller. Edward watched the dance and found it familiar. It was not his first long afternoon in the bank, and not his first time watching a stranger pay a cost that was not listed on any schedule of fees. From the speaker in the ceiling, soft instrumental music filled the quiet and made it seem polite. The melody did not ask that anyone examine anything, and that was, perhaps, why it was chosen. Maria's comments began to pick up speed. A friend typed, "What is happening?" Another answered, "Looks like they are accusing her." Someone else wrote, "Keep filming." A cousin added a string of words that said, "Watching from work," and then a coworker chimed in, "Unbelievable." The stream had a rhythm now. It breathed. Kyle, sensing his moment, straightened. He held the check at chest level, where everyone could see it if they wished. He drew a breath and positioned his hands as a person does when about to break a cracker cleanly down the middle. The gesture alone pulled the room tighter. The woman in the floral scarf murmured, "Don't," though it was unclear to whom she spoke. "This is textbook fraud." His voice rang against glass and marble. He pulled, and the check tore from the fresh split. A longer rip now, a sound impossible to mistake. The halves fluttered, and for a fraction of a beat, the paper looked like wings that would not lift. A small gasp scattered through the line, the way a flock rises when a shadow crosses the lawn. Jessica's hand tightened on the stroller handle and then loosened. Her face set hard against the spike of adrenaline that arrives when children are near a scene they do not understand. The boy with the knit cap pressed his cheek to his mother's sleeve. Edward, who as a young man had been told to keep his voice down in rooms like this one, closed his eyes for a heartbeat and opened them again. Maria's camera shook as her hand trembled and then steadied. The comments broke into short phrases. "I saw it," he tore it, kept filming, called someone. The number of eyes on the small rectangle ticked higher by 5s and 10s. A modest crowd at first, the way a diner fills in the late morning one booth, then another, then suddenly the server is moving a coffee pot through a maze of elbows and newspapers. Susan let the noise settle, and then arranged her features into the calm of decision. She looked at Angela without hostility, but also without doubt. Her voice found the tone used to give directions on airplanes and waiting rooms. It suggested that compliance would be simple and painless if the listener chose it. She nodded toward the door, toward the cool light outside and the street where buses sighed and cabs idled, and a man sold hot dogs from a cart with careful mustard stripes. "If you don't leave now, we'll call the police." Angela glanced at the wall clock and noted the time the captain knows a buoy on a familiar channel. 2:55 in the afternoon. Her gaze returned to the counter, but something in her posture changed, as if she had placed a finger on the invisible timeline and felt it humming beneath the surface. People in the lobby sensed it without knowing why. The mood thickened like air before rain. Susan held a desk phone in her palm with the poise of someone who trusts a script to carry her. She raised her voice just enough to travel across glass and marble. "Yes, potential fraud, large amount, black woman, suspicious ID." The words were crisp, clinical, and public, arranged to suggest caution but performing certainty. Heads turned because voices at that volume in a bank mean something official, and official things often become collective. On the wall above a cluster of chairs, a television carried a business channel with its usual ticker of gentle graphs and measured voices. A panelist droned about earnings and forecasts, the kind of language that feels like a warm coat to people who think in quarters and years. No one truly listened. The sound was a musical bed that suggested competence, which is why banks keep it on. Angela unlatched her leather folder again, not to plead or persuade, but to place facts where they could be seen. A boarding pass lay inside, printed plainly. First class, her name in full, the airline's insignia. Beside it, a calendar notification showed a board meeting set for later that afternoon, the kind of appointment that announces its seriousness by the number of names attached. She angled the phone screen so that Susan could see the time blocks, the subject line, the chain of confirmations. It was all polite and prosaic, the administrative handwriting of a life built on schedules and responsibility. Susan glanced, nodded as if acknowledging that lines of text existed, and returned her attention to the path she had chosen. "We will wait for corporate security to advise," she told Kyle, loud enough that the sentence put a frame around the scene. To Angela, she added, "Please be patient while we do our due diligence." Patience, Angela thought, had been the shape of her day, from the moment she buttoned her blazer that morning. She closed the folder and rested both hands atop it. In that small gesture lived a lesson learned long ago. Sometimes the firmest line is drawn by stillness. The line behind her adjusted. A woman in a floral scarf whispered to the man next to her that she needed to get back to work before her break ended. The man with the messenger bag calculated how far he could walk before the last express train. His jaw tightened and softened as he did the math, leaving his annoyance to settle on whichever target would allow him to go home believing his own fairness. A toddler in a stroller tapped a sneaker against a wheel, thump, 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 the beat of impatience, finding an instrument. Maria Lopez kept the phone low, tilted slightly toward her chest. Her breathing steadied as her hands learned the weight of what they held. Comments sprinted now instead of strolling. Names slid past, then words in quick, bright strokes. Watching. Here. Can you zoom? What did he say? Keep recording. A colleague from her old job pinged the feed to a neighborhood group. A cousin tagged a friend who volunteered with a civil rights organization. The circle widened the way ripples do when a stone meets a lake with more force than its size would predict. Kyle stood with his shoulders squared like a man opening a classroom door and expecting to be applauded for punctuality. He kept the torn halves of the check close, a trophy of vigilance. He spoke to Susan, but his sentences were broadcast for the benefit of anyone who needed a reason to approve of what they were seeing. The features do not match the pattern. The spacing is off. The timing is suspicious. This is exactly how they do it. The pronoun did work that nouns often shirk. It was efficient and comfortable and dangerous. Frank Doyle, the security guard, shifted his weight until his polished shoe capped the edge of Angela's shadow. He had the look of a man who can color within lines because he believes lines prevent chaos. His voice aimed for neutral compliance. Ma'am, please step outside. He gestured toward the glass doors, toward the chill beyond, toward the sidewalk where passers-by would slow out of instinct and curiosity. Angela did not move. I will remain at the counter, she said evenly. She did not add that the counter was where transactions happen, where receipts print, where dignity is assumed rather than negotiated. She looked at Frank's eyes, not past them, and his chin lifted by a fraction before he forced it back down into professionalism. Susan returned to the phone, her tone pitched to be heard without shouting, the familiar cadence of a person placing herself within a larger mechanism. We have a situation, she said, then listened. Yes, she has identification. Yes, we have concerns about authenticity. Yes, she is refusing to step away. The phrases stacked like boxes of paper delivered to an office. Uniform, heavy, easy to count. The television above the chairs shifted graphics, blue to green, a commercial for retirement accounts easing in. The narrator's voice promised stability if one would only plan carefully, save consistently, and trust the right partners. A couple on a bench watched birds cross a park the color of late spring. The image had nothing to do with the room beneath it, and everything to do with how rooms like this one hope to feel. Jessica Clark rocked the stroller with a practiced foot, keeping the baby soothed, while her son traced the letters on the dignity poster with his finger, copying the shapes silently. She watched Angela the way a mother watches an adult her children might someday become, cataloging the posture, the restraint, the way a person can occupy space without apology. Edward Harris let his gaze settle on the torn paper in Kyle's hands, then on Angela's folder, then on Susan's phone. He had stood in lobbies like this when a clerk called him son and when a manager called him sir, and he knew how a syllable could be both bridge and blade. He thought of his own father, who once told him in a Southside kitchen that a man must learn to choose between fire and water, and that either choice can shape a life. Maria lowered the phone to hide the swallow and then raised it again to the same quiet angle. Her voice slid into a whisper meant for the microphone and for anybody listening through it. They were calling cops on her. This is racism, live. The sentence stitched together fact and frame and sent it outward with the speed that comes from urgency and a signal that refuses to drop. The number of viewers leapt, then leapt again. Comments shifted tone from curiosity to instruction. Someone typed the customer support number for the bank's regional office. Another posted a link to a news tip line. A third told Maria to hold the shot and not to speak if she felt unsafe. A fourth tagged a reporter known for covering stories like this with patience and teeth. Susan ended her call and set the receiver down with the solemnity of a judge placing a document on the bench. She folded her hands and addressed Angela with a calm that aspired to authority without risk. Corporate security is reviewing. Until we have clearance, we cannot process this transaction. The sentence was draped in a passive voice so that no one in particular had to take responsibility for its consequence. Angela glanced once more at the clock. 2:56 in the afternoon. The minute hand did its work, neither hurried nor lazy. She looked to the line and found Maria's eyes again, then Jessica's, then Edward's, and in each gaze she felt the city's many rooms. Kitchens with radios humming, bus seats with strangers shoulder to shoulder, desks with framed photos and coffee rings. The room had become larger than the bank. Kyle straightened the halves of the check on the counter as if aligning them could make his perspective correct. He spoke softly to Susan and softly to anyone who needed assurance that virtue had a uniform. Attempted bank fraud is a federal crime, he said. savoring the size of the words. We are obligated to escalate. Frank kept his place. He did not push. He did not crowd. He simply remained, his presence a reminder that bodies can be used as barricades even when the hands attached to them stay at rest. The radio on his shoulder crackled with a fragment of someone else's stay static, a number, a name, and then went back to listening. Across the room, a teller sealed a night pouch with practiced precision. She looked at Angela and then dropped her gaze to the seam she had just pressed. The way a person checks a knot after they tie it, checking that something will hold, she reached for a roll of coin and then set it down unused. The television's color tone cooled. The business channel returned from the commercial to a studio where two anchors traded banter about market sentiment. A line of text scrolled along the bottom, indifferent to the drama below. A control room camera cut to a graphic labeled Outlook. An animated arrow hesitated and then slid. Maria felt the energy of the room take on a shape. She knew it from rallies and from church and from neighborhood meetings when the mood tips from talk to action. Her whisper steadied. She framed Angela's hands on the folder, the identification resting atop it. Frank's polished shoe near the line of shadow. Susan's chin, Kyle's fingers over the paper's torn edge. The comments on her stream became sentences instead of fragments. Calls were being made. Screenshots were being saved. People were taking notes. Jessica bent to her son. "Use your inside voice," she murmured, though he had not spoken. He nodded solemnly as if he were a steward of quiet. Edward lifted his cane slightly, then set it down. The faint tap a punctuation mark on a paragraph no one had read aloud. Angela inhaled, let the breath out, then placed the boarding pass on the counter again without speaking. Not to persuade, but to declare presence. The simple act sent a small shiver through the onlookers. The way a singer taking center stage can silence a room before the first note. A hum threaded the ceiling near the vents, or perhaps it came from the television speakers warming to a new task. The anchor's cadence wavered by a hair. A shimmer of static combed the image from left to right, barely there, then gone, then there again, like heat above asphalt. The television on the wall flickered, the screen preparing to switch to breaking news. The television above the chairs cut from a segment on quarterly trends to a still frame that held a red banner like a held breath. For a heartbeat, no sound came, only the low hum of the vents and the faint rattle of a coin roll somewhere in the teller line. Then the anchor's voice, measured and clear, filled the lobby, the way an announcement fills a train station, calm, loud enough to reach, trained to carry urgency without panic. The word that opened it was the word that makes conversation stop, breaking. Angela lifted her face toward the screen, the corners of her mouth lifted by a small, private degree, the kind of change that a painter would call a suggestion rather than a line. To anyone watching, it was barely there. To her, it was a hand touching the exact page of a book she knew by heart. She did not move her hands from the leather folder. She did not look at Susan or Kyle or Frank. She watched the screen. The camera widened on a skyline she knew, steel ribs and glass panes warmed by early spring light, and then settled on the anchor at a desk. The letters of the station behind her shoulder, the graphic bar slid into place with practiced weight. A headline in confident capitals, a subhead that used shorter words to say the same thing again. The anchor spoke the name of a city and then the name of a company, and by the time the sentence reached the number, the lobby had become a single ear. Coleman Technologies, she said, has finalized the acquisition of Wells Fargo's Midwest operations in a deal valued at $2.3 billion. The number floated into the room like a bell tone, round and impossible to ignore. Even those who did not track such figures felt it land. A breath drew in here, another over there, and the rustle of coats quieted. The man with the messenger bag let his shoulder drop. Jessica Clark's hand stilled on the stroller handle. Edward Harris looked from the screen to Angela to the torn halves of paper on the counter and back again, as if he were tracing lines on the map to see which rows intersected. The anchor continued with details that would interest people who read business pages over black coffee. She noted timing the way a conductor notes tempo. She named executives with the crispness of a roll call. She described the strategy in sentences that had been adjusted to fit the length of the segment. She did her work like someone who knows that most stories enter the world on schedules. Near the exit, Frank let his focus climb from the doorway to the screen. He did not step back. He did not step forward. He stood as if the floor beneath him had changed from tile to a slowly moving walkway, and he was deciding how to let the motion carry him without falling. Susan's attention rose to the television, and then fell back to the counter, to the identification, to the boarding pass, to Angela's steady hands. She pressed her lips together for the space of a single syllable, and then released them again as if no one had noticed. Kyle blinked, the protective certainty in his posture thinning by a thread. The halves of the torn check seemed suddenly less like evidence and more like something a person would want to tape carefully back together. At Maria's side, the phone camera trembled once and steadied. The chat field pulsed under her thumb like a small, feverish bird. Names flickered. A reporter's handle appeared with a simple word watching. A friend wrote that she had texted someone at a local newsroom. Someone else asked for the branch location. Maria did not speak. She kept the frame wide enough to hold Angela, the counter, the torn paper, the faces turned upward to the glow. The anchor's voice softened by an inch, the way a person lowers a lamp at dusk. As part of this integration, she said, oversight of branch operations will involve the company's chief technology officer, Dr. Angela Coleman. The word doctor landed with the same clean edges it always carries when a life's long labor is reduced to a single courtesy. The name that followed it entered the room with no apology. It did not have to. It belonged to the woman standing at the counter with both hands on the folder, whose face was lit now by cool light from above and warmer light from the screen above that. The camera changed to a photograph, the kind a company commissions for annual reports and introductions to boards. A half smile, direct eyes, a background that suggests clarity and confidence without showing any place in particular. The lobby saw that face and saw that it was the same face at the counter, in the blazer with the precise stitching, in the watch that marked seconds with discreet certainty. For a moment, the room was as quiet as the inside of a seashell. A soft sound rose, not quite an exhale, not quite a murmur. It moved through the line like a breeze across tall grass. People who had not been sure what they were witnessing found a word for it, and then another. Jessica's son, who had been tracing letters on the poster that promised respect, looked from the screen to Angela and then to his mother's face, trying to fit the pieces into a single picture. Angela did not bow or smile or deliver a line. She did not announce herself. She did not look for anyone's permission to exist in the circle of light she now occupied fully. She kept her hands where they were and let the weight of the broadcast do what broadcasts do best: connect rooms that do not know one another and place a single name across the threshold between them. The anchor summarized the likely steps to follow: integration plans, operational reviews, a town hall for staff in the coming weeks. She named times in the language of people who plan by calendars and invitations. Later this afternoon, tomorrow morning, early next week. She returned to the number $2.3 billion in the way that segments return to their headline before they close, as if to make sure no one forgets what the story is about. The camera returned to her face, then to the graphic, then to the skyline. The music underneath signaled a turn to weather, to traffic, to the kind of useful information that sloughs tension from shoulders and tells people how to move through their cities without missing dinner. But before the segment could fully pivot, the director in some control room saw what was on the wire and allowed one more image to roll. It was a headshot again, the name again, the title again, just long enough that anyone who had looked away would look back and see what mattered. Then the lower third faded, and the anchor said that more details were coming and that viewers could find them on the station's website. The screen slid into a sponsor's message about a pharmacy chain and then to traffic maps lit with red and green. The silence that followed inside the bank was not empty. It was crowded with recognition. In that spacious pause, everybody silently reshelved what they had just seen alongside what they had believed 5 minutes earlier. The brain is an efficient librarian. It can file apologies next to excuses and call the shelf experience. The heart takes longer. Kyle put the halves of the check down so carefully that they did not overlap. He squared the edges with a precision that had not interested him before. A single bead of sweat ticked from his temple into his hairline and disappeared, leaving no trace. His training about fraud patterns did not include a section on moments when the problem is a person holding the rulebook like a shield. Frank drew a steady breath and let it out through his nose, the kind of breath a person practices when a doctor recommends lowering blood pressure. He loosened his shoulders by one click. His hands remained at his sides. The small radio at his collar hummed once, then rested, as if even static were taking care not to intrude. Susan's face shifted through expressions that would be familiar to anyone who has ever believed that the ground beneath them was a sure thing, and then discovered a seam running through it. Performance, confusion, calculation, and then a kind of blanching that proves heat was there and has suddenly fled. Her eyes rose to the screen again, as if it might offer a revision. Screens do not revise. They repeat. Maria, whose feet had been a quiet stream a few minutes earlier, watched comments stack so quickly that the words became rain. She saw the reporter's handle send a direct message. She saw a friend text that she was walking over from a nearby office. She felt her own heartbeat, sure and bright, as if her ribs were a small drum. Jessica's son tugged her sleeve. She bent to hear him. He asked a question that children ask when they watch adults start to reckon with something adults should have known already. She whispered an answer he would likely remember, not because of the words, but because of the way she said them. She touched his hair. She steadied the stroller with her knee. Edward's hand found the top of his cane. He bowed his head in the gesture he might one day call a prayer and might equally call a pause. He had been waiting, most of his life, for rooms to see what they contained. He looked at Angela and gave the smallest nod he had, the one man of his generation learned in barbershops and churches, a signal that says, "I see you," and leaves the rest unsaid. At the counter, Angela lifted her right hand from the folder and set it gently on the counter's edge, a small claim to space that did not require defense. The hand was steady. The act was unremarkable. It said more than any speech she might have given to strangers who were not any longer strangers at all. The second it happened, the room altered. A man near the back let out a sound that was half laugh and half groan, the noise people make when they realize they have been on the wrong side of a story. Someone whispered a single syllable that contained both regret and relief. The bank's air returned to its usual temperature, but everyone felt the draft of something ending and something else beginning. The television's volume lowered a notch as a weather map took over, showing a pale band of rain forecast to drift across the lake by evening. Sky and water would blur the way they often do in spring. People would hurry with umbrellas, calves would fill, diners would serve meatloaf specials to couples at corner booths. In a handful of living rooms, the segment would replay on a phone held low over a coffee table. Susan's throat worked. The swallow did not help. She tried again, reached for a word, and found only a handful of broken consonants. Her gaze cut to Kyle, to Frank, to Maria's lowered phone, then returned to the head at the counter that now belonged to a person she had just watched introduced to the city with honorific and title. The security of scripts deserted her and left behind only sound, which faltered. That can't be real. Maria's breath caught and pushed out in the rush that blurred the microphone for a beat before the audio came clean again. Her voice pitched low in the way people speak when astonishment will not fit itself into a whisper. Oh my God, it's her. The lobby held the aftershock of the broadcast like a bell holds the last trembling of a struck note, and in that suspended quiet a wash of light rolled across the glass wall facing the avenue. People turned because their eyes were already trained upward, and the brightness drew them as surely as a lighthouse beam draws a sailor's glance. Beyond the doors, the electronic billboard on the corner cycled through a handful of familiar ads. A shoe store with spring discounts, a musical coming to a grand old theater, a coffee chain reminding commuters to try a new roast. The screen paused, shifted, and then opened on a face that brought a new kind of silence to the room. The boy in the image was on the edge of manhood, the geometry of childhood nearly erased by the lines of a jaw that had learned purpose. He wore a simple shirt and a steady, camera-ready calm. His eyes, unmistakably, belonged to the woman at the counter. Inside the bank, people leaned as if a single step forward might somehow confirm what they were seeing. Outside, pedestrians lifted their chins to watch, and a couple by the crosswalk slowed even though the light had changed. The sound on the video did not carry into the lobby, but it did not have to. The ad ran with captions that snapped across the glass partition in bright, simple type, a message timed to match the boy's voice. Wells Fargo helped my family build our dreams with respect and dignity. The words moved like a steady tide, declarative, proud, impossible to misread. For a moment, the building felt made of breath and light. Jessica Clark's son pressed both hands against the stroller's plastic tray and stared at the billboard, then pivoted to Angela's face and back again, minds in small bodies making maps in real time. Edward Harris lifted his chin a fraction and whispered a syllable that meant recognition, then folded his fingers over the top of his cane. Frank Doyle's posture softened by an inch, as if a weight had shifted from one side of a beam to the other and the building had chosen not to creak. Susan did not speak. She watched the boy finish a sentence, watched the frame cut to a slow pan of the branch's interior, the same marble, the same light, the same promise in a poster that hung inside this very room, and then watched as the camera returned to the young face and let the tagline sit, unhurried. Maria Lopez's phone caught the reflection of the billboard in the bank's glass and doubled the image on her Livestream, an echo within an echo. Her comments multiplied until they were a braid of voices, some familiar, some new. The name of the company, the words power and truth, the phrase I am calling now. A reporter typed that she was on her way, then added that she was bringing a photographer. A man in the chat gave the street address and wrote that he had copied the video. The current widened and found channels it had been looking for. Angela stood perfectly still, and stillness in that moment became the most eloquent form of authority in the room. She let the billboard play to its end, the way a conductor lets a coda carry all the way to silence. Then she turned just enough for her voice to cross the small distance between her and the people who had become her audience. That's my son, and this is your bank's campaign. The line was so simple that its edges gleamed. It did not scold or demand. It only placed a mirror where one had been missing. In the line, an ordinary day in the lobby became a hinge on which careers and reputations would swing. The man with the messenger bag covered his mouth with the back of his hand and stared at the pattern in the carpet, seeing it for the first time. Jessica's eyes filled without spilling. A held weather no forecast had mentioned. Maria caught Angela's words, and her stream trembled, then steadied again as she widened the frame to hold reactions. The quick blink from a teller who had been balancing a drawer a moment ago, The way Frank's shoulders rounded as if he had stepped out of formation, the way Edward's attention softened into something that looked like relief and grief braided together. Outside, the billboard looped. The boy's smile was the same on each pass, as if the city could not understand the first time and needed another chance. The captions to promise respect and dignity were words that a bank had printed and a family had lived. The light from the screen moved across faces like a slow tide. In it, skin tones warmed, eyes lifted, lips tightened, and a few people looked away, as if the brightness were too honest to stare into directly. Susan tried to find policy in her mind and discovered silence where a paragraph should have been. When her memory finally produced a sentence, it belonged to training rather than conscience, and it dissolved in the air before any sound could carry it. She looked toward the glass wall office as if an answer might be written on her desk blotter. It was not. Kyle, who had been a man of patterns and certainties only minutes earlier, felt sweat gather along his hairline as if his scalp had remembered heat for the first time in months. He seemed suddenly to see the halves of the check not as artifacts of vigilance, but as a record of impatience and contempt. His throat clicked. His eyes flicked to the boy's face, to Angela's hands, to the torn paper, to the small red light on Maria's phone that meant the world was watching. He lifted a hand halfway, palm open, a reflexive gesture of apology that could not travel the distance it needed to cross. The camera on the wall blinked its indifferent blink. Somewhere behind the counter, the printer purred and settled, a machine returning to rest after a routine task. The poster that promised dignity did not move. It did not need to. Jessica's son, whose fingers had traced those same letters a short time ago, whispered a question that only his mother heard. She answered in a voice the stream did not catch, but her last word was yes, and the faith in that word steadied her hands. Edward thought of the kitchens where he had listened to baseball games on summer nights, and the church basements where he had sorted canned goods by hand, and he decided that a city is no bigger than a moment in which strangers agree on what is true. Maria's feet climbed past familiar numbers into a space where a friend of a friend becomes a crowd. The reporter posted that she was 3 blocks away. Someone added that the station had cutting with a headline. Another wrote that they had sent a clip to their union rep. The phrases on the chat were a chorus. The words did not blur. They harmonized. Angela shifted her weight, not as a challenge, but as a person might when preparing to leave a chair at the end of a long meeting to conclude a point. She did not raise her voice, and yet the ear hears intent the way the eye reads light. Quietly, the room rearranged itself around her, as if the furniture could sense authority more quickly than people could. Frank tilted his head, a small pledge. He would follow the next instruction without argument. Susan lifted her chin to protest and found that only breath came. Kyle's fingers loosened. The halves of the check lost their tension and sagged like a torn banner after the wind fell. He looked at the paper as if it might tell him what to do, and when it did not, the truth emptied his hands for him. The pieces slid, then dropped, and his voice arrived a moment after, low and stunned, an admission tied to the tile. We ruined everything. Silence held for a breath. Then the office phone on the manager's desk began to peal, one ring after another, as if the building itself had remembered protocol and was trying to catch up. Lights blinked on the console, not just one line, but several, and each tone carried the same mix of urgency and embarrassment. Susan reached for the handset and froze. She looked at Angela's steady hands, at the torn paper on the counter, at the faces turned toward them, then lifted the receiver with care and pressed the speaker button so the room would hear what the room had earned. A man introduced himself with a rush that failed to hide the break in his voice. He gave his name and title, regional director, then asked for confirmation of the location. The words became slower as he continued, as if he had stepped into deeper water than he expected. He addressed the manager first, the way people in suits often do. Then he addressed the woman at the counter with a formality that bent toward respect. He used her title in full. He used her last name without stumbling. He asked permission to speak plainly. Angela angled her face toward the desk, not moving from her place. "You may," she said, and the simple permission made the lobby feel like a chamber where oaths are taken. "I am profoundly sorry," the director said, and the apology did not sound like a press release. It sounded like a man realizing how quickly a small room can become a mirror. "We will make this right." He paused, and the room could hear him gather the pieces of a plan. "Dr. Coleman, we will adopt your recommendations immediately." Angela's voice stayed calm. "You will conduct an independent diversity audit across the district," she said. "You will institute mandatory anti-bias training every month with measurable outcomes. You will implement a real-time customer service feedback system linked to performance reviews so that patterns are seen before they become crises. And you will make a community contribution to civil rights organizations here in Chicago in the amount of $500,000. There was no rustle of surprise at the sum. The number felt inevitable, like a bill that had come due. The director agreed without bargaining. He said the word yes 3 times, each affirmation steadier than the one before. He added that press statements would follow and that a staff town hall would be scheduled within the week. He did not promise that no one would be hurt by the consequences, only that the consequences would be borne by the people who had earned them rather than by the people who had endured them. Angela nodded once. She did not soften the edges. There will also be personnel actions, she said, and they would begin now. Susan's lips parted to object, then closed again, and the sound that escaped was not a word. Kyle, who had been clutching halves of paper as if they were proof of virtue, stared at his hands as if they had misled him. Angela looked to the guard. "Mr. Doyle," she said, and even the courtesy of the title felt like daylight. "Please escort Mr. Peterson and Miss Miller to the office to await human resources. Their access is suspended, effective immediately." Frank's reply was simple. "Yes, ma'am." He did not crowd, did not touch, did not perform dominance. He stepped in the way a person steps when conscience and policy finally share a path. Kyle's shoulders lowered as if an old weight had finally emitted its name. Susan glanced once toward the glass wall, toward the city that would now know her face, then walked without instruction. The door to the office clicked shut behind them, and the sound was a closing parenthesis. The phones kept ringing, but now the tone felt different, as if calls from headquarters and reporters and lawyers were all variations of the same sentence. "We saw, we heard, we are coming." Maria Lopez's stream, balanced in the crook of her hand, showed the viewer count climbing into the thousands. Comments were no longer a trickle of exclamation points. They were complete thoughts. They were names and affiliations. They were offers to help and demands for accountability. A reporter announced she had reached the block and asked in the chat whether she could identify the woman at the counter by title. Maria did not answer. She maintained the frame and let the room speak for itself. Jessica bent to her son and daughter, her voice a low music meant for family. "Remember what you are seeing," she said. "Remember how a person stands when she knows who she island." She smoothed a straight curl back into place, then straightened, her eyes damp but unafraid. The little boy pressed his palms together as if he were keeping a secret safe. The regional director spoke again, this time to everyone who could hear, to the customers present. He said, "I apologize for what you witnessed. This institution will earn your trust back, not by claim but by conduct." The sentence was careful and right. He asked Angela whether she wished to add anything. She took a breath the room could hear and let it out the room could feel. She did not give a speech. She did not list her reason, did not recount what had been said to her, did not name the 1,000 ways a day can go wrong. She lifted her chin the distance a person lifts her chin when she intends a line to carry. Professional respect should be for everyone, always. The words reached every corner. They reached the security cameras and the teller drawers and the poster that promised more than it had kept. They reached Edward Harris, who closed his eyes and nodded as if someone had finally finished a sentence he had been trying to say for 50 years. They reached the college kid with a pizza box who would later repeat them to a roommate and mean it. They reached a barista 2 doors down who was watching the stream and would offer a free cup to Angela if she passed by before closing. They reached the regional director's silence, and his silence told the truth. Sometimes, the person outside the hierarchy is the only one who can define the center of it. Outside, a news van eased to the curb, conspicuous and careful. A camera operator lifted a tripod from the back and set it with the grace of practice. The reporter approached the glass, seeking permission with her eyes rather than with her badge. Maria turned her phone a fraction to include the movement without losing the heart of the frame. Frank opened the office door a hand's width and spoke quietly to someone inside, then closed it again. He returned to his post at a respectful distance, not as a barrier now, but as a witness. A teller at the far station closed the cash drawer without looking down, her eyes still on the counter where Angela stood. Another teller whispered that she felt both shame and relief and did not know in what order. The room accepted both. The director concluded with logistics. Human resources would arrive within the hour. Temporary leadership would be appointed before the day ended. A formal announcement would go to staff first thing in the morning. He repeated his apology and ended the call, and the click that followed was not abrupt. It was careful, like the last ditch on the scene. For a moment, no one moved, because no one wanted to break what had been mended. Then, the ordinary life of a lobby returned in softened form. A customer asked whether she could make her deposit now. A teller answered yes, and the word sounded like a promise rather than a policy. Someone held the door for an elderly man and did not rush his pace. A woman in a floral scarf gave a small nod to Angela, as if to sign her name beneath those 2 sentences about respect and always. Angela gathered her identification and the boarding pass, not as proof to anyone, but as the simple closing of a folder. She would later sit at a table where decisions were made and repeat the details of the protocol until they were not a program but a habit. She would not retell the indignity. She would redesign the room so the indignity could not occur without a chorus of bells and voices and lights answering back. Jessica touched her son's shoulder. "Say it with me," she whispered. And he did, repeating the word kindness like a bead on a string. He looked at Angela the way a child looks at a lighthouse on a dark shoreline and understood more than language can hold. Maria steadied her phone one last time. She widened the shot to include the counter, the poster, the office door, the faces that had traveled from shock to clarity. Her voice, when it came, carried the warmth of someone who knows that a neighbor can be the whole world when a door is opened and a story is told. She did not add commentary or search for a clever close. She gave the moment back to itself and offered the lesson as a benediction. This is how racism ends, with truth and power. In the end, the noise of the lobby faded, and what remained was not the ringing phones or the shuffle of papers, but the memory of a woman standing calm while the world caught up to the truth. For those who watched, both inside the branch and through the small glow of a phone, the image of dignity refusing to bend became stronger than any accusation. It reminded us that prejudice, no matter how ordinary it tries to appear, can be unmasked when light is allowed to shine steadily upon it. The lesson is simple, yet enduring. Justice is not found in loud declarations, but in the quiet insistence that every person deserves respect, and in the willingness of others to witness and to change. Like a lantern set in a window on a stormy night, even one clear act of fairness can guide a whole community toward a safer ground. So take a moment to think of the silent kindnesses that surround your days. And if this story touched your heart, consider passing on a measure of that warmth to someone still waiting for the light.